So today, we're going to be talking about health, mental health, and education. And so we're so excited. I have Ruth Takesta-Dix with me today. My name is Rahwa, and I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll let Ruth go ahead and introduce herself. So my name is Rahwa Kassel. I was born in Eritrea, raised in Chicago. I am married, mother of three. I've been an educator now for almost 2 decades. Taught in elementary and middle schools, worked as a math interventionist and instructional coach, and now I am currently an assistant principal at an elementary school. Ruth?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Ruth Takeste Dix. I was born and raised in Chicago and have lived here most of my life. My parents are Eritrean immigrants. I was a high school English teacher for 8 years before transitioning to graduate level and then undergraduate level college advising, which I've been doing for the last 6 years. And now I'm also a trauma-informed licensed clinical professional counselor. I've been providing therapy for the last 3 years. I'm trained in EMDR and brain spotting, which are two body-based healing modalities. They're a little different from traditional talk therapy. I love working with students and clients who are Black women and children of immigrants struggling with issues like anxiety, trauma, life transitions like marriage, divorce, parenting, and more. And very excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Ruth. We're going to go ahead and just kick it off and start off with what is mental health? How would you describe that?
Yeah, so mental health has to do with your internal state, right? Your emotions, how you're feeling, the things that you're thinking. Sometimes it can be in a good place, and sometimes we can be having a hard time with our mental health. So it's not something that's static, right? It changes. And just like our physical health is something that we need to regularly take care of through things like exercise and nutritious foods and doctor's visits, our mental health is also something that we need to regularly take care of and check in on through a lot of the same things, honestly. And there's more things that we can do for our mental health as well, like attending therapy, prayer, meditating, journaling, spending time with loved ones, family, friends, doing activities that we love, and a lot of other great things.
Thank you for sharing that. As an educator, I'll just add that mental health is a really important part of a student's overall well-being. I'll say in the almost 20 years that I've been doing education, mental health has become such a very important hot topic of conversation, much more so, I would say, than even students' academic progress, and has been a topic of conversation for lots of parents and lots of educators, and really impacts how a student is doing. So it's really an important topic to be discussing overall, but also specifically when we're talking about students in the school setting. So, Ruth, what are signs of a healthy mental health state?
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add too, I noticed like the mental health issues as well when I was a teacher in schools and with the whole COVID pandemic, and that also kind of drew me into the transition. But signs of healthy mental health include like your emotions, right? How you're feeling well, feeling hopeful about the future, having positive thoughts and emotions like joy and excitement, being able to experience those positive feelings doesn't mean that we're going to always feel positive all the time. It's just not realistic, right? Emotions happen on a spectrum, but when we experience some of those negative emotions, like sadness, worry, fear, anger, are we able to like bounce back, or is that a state that we stay in? So if we're able to kind of move through those emotions, those are signs of healthy mental health, and being able to like successfully engage in normal everyday activities like taking care of yourself, eating, showering, getting dressed, participating in work and school, socializing with your peers, being able to sleep well and have a good night's sleep. These are all signs of healthy mental health. What about you, Rafa? What do you think?
Yeah, from a school perspective, some of the things that we would look for in a student that is experiencing, healthy mental health state is, can you form and maintain age-appropriate relationships with peers and adults? Students are able to express emotions or ask for help when they need it. You can recover from normal setbacks, even if you need support, but are able to kind of bounce back when things happen. Participating in school activities, you don't have to, I mean, enjoy learning, right? That's definitely something we see more in the elementary school grades. It's normal as students in their adolescent years don't necessarily love learning, but there's something about school that they enjoy and that they have interests and activities that they participate in at school. Adaptability is a huge one. They can adapt to change, transition. And really, one of the bigger things that we're seeing in schools is this idea of a sense of belonging. Like, do you feel like you belong to the larger community of your school? Even if it's not that you belong in every space, but that you have some people that you feel like you can connect to and that you can say, these are my people or this is where I belong. An ability for transitions is also really important. And I mean, I will just add, like Ruth said, it's not going to be about children being happy all the time, but we definitely are looking for a pattern of behavior with those emotions. And if we're seeing a pattern that is healthy or a pattern that's not healthy.
Yeah, and I want to just add for that sense of belonging piece too, especially I mean also at the college level is super important for like retention, right? And students feeling like they deserve to be there. So that's really great points.
Thank you, Ruth. What might be some signs that something is not quite right or something is wrong with your child's mental health? What would you say, Ruth?
Some signs to look out for can include like if your child isn't engaging in activities that they used to love, because maybe they aren't getting joy from those activities anymore. So, for example, if they love to paint or they love gymnastics and they suddenly just don't want to do them anymore, and aren't having a good time doing them, that could be a sign. They may be acting out or misbehaving at school or at home and in other settings when that is not characteristic for them or their norm. They may be yelling loudly, having like explosive fits of rage in response to things that upset them. They might be really irritable or angry and have trouble controlling their emotions. And of course, right, with children, depending on how old they are, where they are at developmentally, like some of these behaviors could be developmentally appropriate. So it's really important to think about your child, how old they are developmentally, like what is their context, um, and how long these behaviors have been going on, as well as like how their behaviors are impacting their ability to function and how they're responding to intervention, right, when you do try to support them with some of these things. Some other things, warning signs could be if they're quieter than normal, sadder, spending more time in bed than usual, or not wanting to spend time with people if they're isolating themselves when they used to really enjoy being around others. They might be really worried about something or like a lot of things all the time and be regularly communicating how worried they are. They may be having difficulty focusing, whether that's in school or at home, and paying attention when they maybe didn't have some of those struggles before. And some other things they might be scared to go to school, or leave the house or be without their parents at all. They might have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep or even be oversleeping and not wanting to get out of bed. Their energy levels might be decreased and they might have a hard time doing some of those normal activities that they used to have no trouble doing, like showering, getting dressed. Um, Pay attention for changes in appetite as well if they're eating a lot less than normal or overeating a lot more than they usually do. And again, these things, you want to be alert for any behaviors that are out of the ordinary for you or your child. If they're becoming a pattern, and impacting their ability to complete those everyday tasks, whether that's at home, school, or elsewhere. And then I would say, like, the big one that we want to watch out for is if a child says something along the lines of, they want to die or they don't want to be here or they want to harm themselves or someone else, or they show any evidence of self-harm. If you find like evidence of like cut marks or anything like that on their wrists, for example, these are warning signs to take very, very seriously and should not be ignored. And we'll talk more in a little bit about resources for support if this is something that you experience.
Thank you, Ruth. That was an exhaustive list. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that up to you. We're going to go ahead to the next question. So, what are things that could contribute to mental health issues in school?
Yes, a lot of things. But some things that could contribute, I would say like a big one, especially for today's youth that maybe like we didn't experience so much growing up, would be phones and social media. Super, super addictive and really cause a lot of unhealthy comparison of children to their peers. It can lead to things like anxiety, sadness, self-esteem, and body image issues, right? Where they really don't feel good about how they look because they're constantly comparing themselves to their peers, and looking to see that instant gratification through likes. Bullying and cyberbullying is another big one. And cyberbullying is just bullying that happens online or through phones and texting or through social media. And these can definitely be big sources of stress for students in schools. And unfortunately, kids can be very cruel sometimes. I guess adults can be too. And I can just share like a personal experience. You know, I attended a small private elementary school in Chicago with other children of immigrants, most of whom were African, and I got made fun of growing up for having big teeth and being too skinny and having braces, and maybe some of us have some of those experiences. And then when I went to high school, I attended a large public suburban school in like a very wealthy district, so different demographic. And then I was made fun of by the Black kids for not being Black enough and for being African. And then in my honors classes, I was the only Black girl, so I got made fun of by the white people in those classes for being Black. Got microaggressions, like I was smart for a Black girl, jokes like I would score barbecue sauce on my ACT and I should apply to Harvard because I'm Black, so of course I'm gonna get in. And these kinds of comments definitely impacted my perception of self. And honestly, were not things that I shared with my parents. Growing up, I didn't want to really burden them, right? Like they're busy trying to make it in America. So I kind of kept them to myself and didn't necessarily realize how problematic it was really until later on. It was really important to check in with your children about comments they might be getting from peers and how to handle them. And we'll kind of talk about that more as well. And some other things could be like academic stress. So I might be worried if they're not understanding the material, if they feel like they're behind their peers or they feel like dumb even though they're not, right? Um, but yeah, any challenges at home as well, if there are struggles with the parents, if they're arguing in front of their kids, if they're fighting, if there's worries that the parents are kind of verbalizing about not having enough money, food, clothes, or other resources, that can kind of put children in a place where they feel a responsibility to try to manage those concerns that are adult concerns. And then, like I said, the last thing I would say is developmentally, children and adolescents care very much about peer approval. It's like one of the most, if not the most important things for them. So feeling like if you're a child or adolescent that you don't fit in with your peers or have friends that you feel safe with and comfortable with and can be yourself around, can also really contribute to mental health issues in school.
Thank you, Ruth. Just a couple of quick things that I'll add is that the online cyber thing from an educator's perspective feels like it definitely impacts our girls a whole lot more than it impacts our boys. Girls tend to interact with social media in a very different way than boys do. Boys tend to gravitate toward online gaming, and that creates a more communal aspect around online activity. Whereas our girls like to gravitate towards social media platforms like Instagram or TikTok, where you are doing things for attention and the likes. We've actually seen an increase in the number of conflicts that we deal with as administrators over things that did not happen during the school day at all. Like a
Mm.
lot of online stuff over the weekend. It used to be Fridays, used to be our heavy hitter day in terms of dealing with student discipline, but it actually has become Monday now because of whatever weekend drama was happening online at night. If you're the kind of parent who allows your child to have her cell phone, like thinking about putting on and off times for it, because what we find is that there's a lot of online activity that's happening when kids are behind closed doors in their own room, like even throughout the entire night. And I don't know if that's something that a lot of parents are realizing, like how much that impacts. And the other thing I will say is, like Ruth, you mentioned the fact that you were going through some of that microaggression and it wasn't something that you were sharing with your parents. And we find a lot of times that our parents are not as informed about what's happening on social media, but also in school, like especially when they get into their adolescent years. And if you're a parent like me, I know you're like, how was your day? And kids are like, fine. And they're not really, giving you a lot of information. They're not really going into detail. And so when you're asking your child how your day is, you really need to dig a little bit deeper and you need to be asking more pointed questions. If you know about their friends, a lot of my kids' friends come to our house and I just listen. I take them. I'm the carpool pom and I'm just around. I don't necessarily, interject myself a lot into what's happening, but it's nice to just see how they're interacting, what they're talking about, what's happening at home. I provide snacks after school. The kids come over and hang out, but it just gives me a little bit of a pulse of what's going on because I'm not spending all day with them. But teachers are, right? Teachers are, school personnel is spending a lot of that time and seeing how your child is interacting and how school might be affecting them. So this is something that if I would say an educator or a school personnel person is bringing up an issue to you that you have not seen personally or that you don't think is an issue, I'm not saying that they are in a position to diagnose or know all the reasons behind, but I do think it's important that maybe you dial in a little bit more, even if you're not seeing that, to kind of look and use that as an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper with what's going on with your child at school, because how they present at school might be very different from how they're presenting at home, which is a safe, comforting environment where things might feel a little bit different.
I just want to add, I think that's a great idea to invite the kids over with their friends so you can really, like you said, be present to gauge what's happening. Yeah, we gotta know what's going on to the degree that's possible. And I know that gets harder as kids get older, right? Adolescents, and they kind of want to keep that distance. So that's a really great strategy.
Thank you. Ruth, so something is wrong. What do I do now? What can you do to support your child's mental health if I do feel like there is something going on that requires more attention?
Yeah, and I think you kind of started addressing this too, right? By asking those pointed questions, right, that go beyond that surface. So really inviting your child to have an honest and open conversation and the without judgment thing piece, I think is really important. You want to create a safe space that truly actually is comfortable for your child to open up about if they are having struggles. And that can start by like sharing your own struggles, right? So you might share an example of how you sometimes might be acting differently when you're having a hard time. And the more specific that you can be, the better. And then you can share, what do you do to help yourself feel better? And then kind of transition to your child. So talk about the behaviors that you notice in them lately that seem a little bit different, and check in with them. Ask them how have they been feeling and what's wrong. You can let them know that you love them and are here for them no matter how they are feeling. There's nothing wrong with how they're feeling, that you're here to help them and that they don't have to carry whatever they're dealing with alone. I do think sometimes children, I think especially like Habesha children, feel like their parents are already going through enough and don't want to burden their parents. So I think opening the door for that communication, letting them know like you are their parent, you are here to support them, they don't have to do things alone is really important. And as kind of Rockwell said earlier too, you can also check in with others in your child's support system, right? Because they do spend a lot more time with other people, like at school, their teachers, their coaches, even some of your child's friends' parents, if they're over at their house to see what they've noticed. If you feel like something is wrong, you can encourage your child to check in with their school social worker or counselor or psychologist and have a talk with them. And you can also look into getting your child a private therapist outside of school as well, depending on what their needs are. It is really important to intervene early and get your child the support they need, that has far better impacts as opposed to letting that like problem continue to fester and grow. And if your child has expressed thoughts of wanting to die or not wanting to be here anymore, wanting to hurt themselves or someone else, or has actually harmed themselves, like if they've cut themselves, for example, It is important to take action, right? So you can call 911 and take them to the emergency room to be assessed for their safety and any risk of harming themselves or anyone else any further. This doesn't automatically mean, I know this can sound scary, right? This doesn't automatically mean that your child will be hospitalized, right? It's an assessment, um, but it is a possibility if they are deemed an active suicide risk. So there's different levels of suicidality. There's active versus passive. But at any rate, your child should not be left alone if they are experiencing these thoughts, and I've shared them with you. In any ways that they could potentially hurt themselves, like pills, scissors, razors, knives should be removed. And there is a mental health, youth, and suicide um, crisis. I just want to emphasize that, and that has drastically gone up, and especially among Black youth. So I can't emphasize the importance of really taking any indications of suicide risk very seriously, whether you think that your child is seriously having these thoughts or not. And if your child is already seeing a licensed therapist or psychiatrist, you can contact them for support as well. There's also the free National Suicide and Crisis Hotline. It's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 988. You can give them a call or text. And then once if your child has these thoughts, which hopefully they're not, but it happens, if they've been assessed by the hospital, you can also follow up with your child's therapist and school social worker or counselor to inform them of what is going on, especially if your child needs to miss school. So I know pretty heavy, and again, hoping that's something we have to deal with, but always something to be prepared for just in case.
That's a lot. So I agree with all of that. I think just one important point that I would just share as a parent who is, raising kids in the Habesha community. I think one thing that is specific to our community and maybe other communities of color is this idea about shame around mental health. And so I would just really caution us to, if you feel like there is an issue, to not ignore it, to not hide, and to not like bury your head in the sand. I think the biggest thing that you can do for your child, if you feel like there is something going on, is educate yourself on what you think the thing is, and then seek out support. And that doesn't have to necessarily be seeking out people in your own community. So if those feelings of shame is something that, or you feel like you don't want to be judged, you don't want to be, people having conversations about your child and their mental health issues, that's all real, right? We all live in the Habesha community. We know what that feels like when you're going through something and then you become the topic of conversation. So, but there are so many other ways in other communities or in your school community, in the health community that you can seek out that level of support. And so I would really encourage you to figure out what's going on and find everything you can about it. My husband always jokes about me. He calls me Mom MD because if I think something is wrong, I am WebMDing it real quick. I want to figure out what's going on. What are the possible diagnoses? What are the possible treatments? Where are we going? How are we going to deal with it? And I really want to come from a space of having some knowledge and seeking out even more knowledge so I can support my student and my child from both perspectives as a parent and as an educator. So if you're seeing something that you are concerned about, I really encourage you to really seek out support and not be tied down by any of those feelings because at the end of the day, you really don't owe anything to anyone but the child who is yours that you are responsible for taking care of. And so I think that takes precedent.
Absolutely. And I'll just add there is really like a lot of stigma and shame, but as we start to have conversations with people that we feel comfortable with, right, who we might not feel that will get judged, you also learn like other people are experiencing similar issues too and may have strategies that they've learned from going through something similar. So also just want to echo like seeking support from people that you trust.
Ruth, what can parents do to support their advocacy wise in school?
Yeah, so to support their kids, parents can do a lot, right? They can maintain a relationship with their child's teachers through periodically checking in, asking questions. You can maybe ask them at pickup or send an email. Just check in to see how your child is doing in school, any challenges they might be experiencing, things that they're doing well in, and how you can better help support their success at school. And then if you notice as a parent that your child might be struggling in school, you can definitely advocate for your child to get extra support both inside and outside of the school. So that might look like helping your child with homework or asking, some cousins or somebody else to help your child with homework, trying to get them into tutoring, and seeing again what resources the school has for things like after school tutoring, talking to the teacher, maybe asking them for additional classroom interventions and what that might look like based on the challenges that your child is experiencing, and potentially getting your child tested to see if there are additional reasons for challenges like a learning disability. And I just want to say, like, it is okay to ask questions, right? I know sometimes in the Habesha community, parents may automatically defer to the school institution and trust that everything that is happening is in the best interest of your child. And hopefully it is. But there's nothing wrong with asking questions just to make sure, and just to ensure your child is being treated fairly, right? Especially if it comes to issues of like your child getting in trouble or disciplined in school. That's okay to push back if you feel that they are being treated unfairly. And you, as parents, can also, of course, check in with your children as well to ask them these same questions, and then share any concerns your child might bring up with your child's teacher and create a plan of support together. And then parents can also get involved in schools by volunteering, chaperoning, and joining things like the Parent Teachers Association, the PTA, just to get more involved and kind of develop those relationships. What do you think, Rahwa, as the school educator?
Yeah, there are lots of ways that parents can support their kids. And I do think that, as Habesha parents, my experience as a kid was the teacher was always right. Like it did not matter what I did in school. Even if I felt like I had a justified reason for doing something, as soon as I came home, it was like, well, did your teacher say, And so I know that we tend to, as a community, defer as a sign of respect to the teachers and the administrators in the building. And as a teacher, and an administrator, I do feel like, most teachers and administrators are looking out for your kid, but your kid is still your responsibility. And I think that you cannot feel afraid or feel shy or feel like it is not within your right as a parent to advocate, to question, or to even ask for something different than what is being offered to you. So, for school age children, there are so many resources, and this is going to be state dependent and school dependent. But generally speaking, your child's teacher, school counselor, social worker, there's usually psychologists in the building, or at least at the district level, there's a school nurse that might be shared or specific to each school. And your administrators are all people who, and I tell this to all my immigrant parents who feel like they can't push back. Their job, they're being paid to support your child in every capacity that they can. So there is nothing wrong with you asking for them to do what they should already be doing if you feel like it's not happening. Some really practical suggestions that I have is share your concerns. If you have a concern about something that your child is experiencing with mental health or that you feel like is, being exasperated at school or starting at school, share it. Ask for a meeting with your child's teacher, ask for a meeting with the administrator if you feel like you're not getting anywhere with your child's teacher. Ask the teacher if they observe these same things or what, if anything, they feel like they should communicate with you. I will say a lot of times you might not have enough time during parent-teacher conferences. If you do go to conferences regularly, those are usually largely academically based. So you might need to ask, well, how are they with their friends? How do you feel like they're doing with challenges? You might need to start asking some of those mental health questions if the teacher isn't offering up that information. Or you might have to ask for a completely separate meeting that has nothing to do with like a conference time meeting that is mostly, like I said, academically focused. I would keep communication factual and specific, especially if you're concerned about a label or how your child might be seen. You can ask for, if you don't know you can just say, what interventions or supports have they tried or is available for your child? Because you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's important to just even ask, what is everything the school could offer you that maybe you might want to ask for? You might want to ask for who is the appropriate contact for specific issues. So obviously your child's teacher is going to be academic issues. Do they have a counselor? Is there a social worker that's assigned to a grade, or do you have access to them? Participating in meetings, I think, in your child's, it like Ruth mentioned, if your child does need additional supports, and I will say there's been a lot of stigmatization around, if your child needs additional services. I'm speaking specifically of if they need special education services or if they have 504s. And I will say the pendulum on that has completely swung in the opposite direction. So if you're as old as I am and you remember what special education looked like in your building, that is not what it is. People are using and getting special services for their students for various reasons, and it actually is incredibly beneficial. And so, if you are still stuck thinking that special education is what it used to be when you were a kid, or what you've heard or what you've seen in movies, I would encourage you to listen and to hear more about what it looks like at your child's specific school and to see if your child could not benefit from those services, specifically like a 504. So if they don't have any academic needs, but they really have some mental health concerns, if they, a lot of anxiety that we're seeing, kids who need increased time on tests, those all can be supported through a 504 plan, which is slightly different from an IEP. And then the other thing I will say is include your student in age appropriate conversations so that they can begin to advocate for themselves. And then don't be afraid to follow up when something isn't working. So if you make a plan with a teacher, if you make a plan with an administrator and you don't feel like you're seeing the results or the plan isn't being followed through the way you think it should be, you just send an email and you just say, "Hey, I'd like to meet. Can we talk about blah, blah, blah?" People do it all the time. As a matter of fact, as an administrator, I am inundated with the number of parents who advocate for their kids, and truly, squeaky wheel gets oiled. So I think if you feel like your child's needs are not being met, do not be afraid to feel like you're being a pest. And I think for us, coming from our cultural background, you will feel like that. And I'm just going to say, lean into it. It's okay. You should feel like that because you have to keep pursuing what you feel like your child needs until your child gets what they need.
Absolutely. Excellent points. And I just want to really reiterate as well, like the necessary impact or the positive impact that that early intervention can have, right? If your student does need specialized services like an IEP or 504, getting them those supports earlier can really work to help close gaps before they get a lot larger and your child ends up struggling a lot more later on. So really encourage you all to take advantage of all the resources that schools have to offer and hold them accountable and document through those emails.
Yep. So Ruth, what are some parents' rights in schools?
Yeah, so parents have a right to have information about their child's record in school. And as we kind of talked about, like reaching out to your child's teacher to ask them questions, right? You have a right to be informed about how your child is doing in school, whether that's successes, challenges, interventions, and individualized education plans, IEPs, or 504s, and to be part of that process of adjusting those plans. What would you add, Rahua?
So this answer is going to really depend on your student circumstances, the district, the state, and whether your child qualifies for special protections with special education or 504 plan. But the important takeaway is that parents and students do have rights, and parents play an enormous role in the decision-making process regarding their child's education. So if you are unsure about your rights, you really should be seeking out the school, and it is their job to explain to you the process, who you should contact, what you can ask for. There are a lot of parent advocacy groups that are out there that give information. PTO is a great place to start. If there are parent organizations at your child's school, that's a great place to start. In my community, we have a Facebook group. All the moms are in it and they ask each other questions, they give each other guidance, and that has been a really great place for getting information. I will also say that if your child does have a 504 or special education services, there are a ton of federal and state laws that provide additional rights to those students who have a disability, who have accommodations. And I really, when it comes to parent rights, in truth, parents have more rights than a school does most of the time. You actually stand in a position to push for those rights if you know what they are. And I will say, as an administrator, I cannot tell you how many times parents bring their lawyers with them to have a conversation with us about something that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're taking it there. But they are really advocating and they know their rights. And so if they feel like something is not being met, and a large majority of the time, the courts tend to side if it does get to a court case situation or if we have to go through arbitration. A lot of the times they lean towards the rights of the parents and the students. So I just say that to empower parents to feel like you do have rights. There are things that schools should be doing to support your child. Each school is going to have its own protocol, each state is going to have its own protocol. So it really is up to us to inform ourselves, but they are there and you should know what they are. All right, so moving right along, services that are available to parents in schools. Ruth, from your experience, what services are typically available?
Yeah, so we've kind of touched on a few of them, but there are lots of services to take advantage of. So again, depending on your school, there may be social workers who can provide assistance to your child. If you're struggling with issues like transportation or homelessness, schools can provide free lunch and income-based waivers for the cost of certain tests or activities for students. There's special education teachers, learning interventionists, psychologists, speech and language pathologists, paraprofessionals, and more staff in addition to teachers, of course, in the schools to support your child and their needs. They may also have fun extracurricular classes and after school activities, clubs, and sports that your child can get involved in. And I encourage you to see what your school has to offer and encourage your child to get involved. What would you add, Rafa?
All the personnel that you've already named for sure. Some schools, depending on where you live, really do have a number of resources. In my community, mental health is a very big topic of conversation, and there's a lot of resources behind it. One thing I would note is that schools can provide educational and school-based supports at your child's school. Now, like meeting weekly with a social worker, or if there is a school psychologist who can provide additional supports, like that can happen at your child's school during their school day. I will say though, if your child is experiencing significant mental health concerns, what supports are available for them at school should not replace comprehensive mental health treatment, and it should not replace you seeking out additional support outside of that school. Environment. One thing I will also add, and I think Ruth, you mentioned it and made me think about it. This might affect a lot of our new to America population of Habesha people who are coming. But an important law that you should know about is McKinney-Vento. It is a law that really talks about your rights as a registered homeless person, and you don't have to necessarily be homeless on the street. But if you are bouncing between homes, if you're living with family members, it just gives students certain protections. It allows you to continue to go to a specific school if you move and it's a good school district and you want to maintain there. McKinney-Vento gives a lot of protections underneath that, and so it's something that might benefit our community to know about.
Learned something new. I didn't know about that. So thank you for sharing that.
So Ruth, if I would like to support my child's mental health, what could I do? What could I add to what you've already mentioned in order to support my child's health?
Yeah, so modeling taking care of your mental health is a really great way to support both you and your child's mental health. So you can incorporate your child into activities that you do for your mental health and do them together. Invite them if they want to join you, like exercise, prayer, journaling, taking walks outside, taking deep breaths, meditating, doing activities that you love. You can also model healthy boundaries. I know this is kind of hard for all people, but I think especially or a lot of people rather, but especially Habesha people, modeling those healthy boundaries so they can see that behavior, right? So saying no to requests that you do not want to do and taking adequate time to rest and explaining to your kids why you're doing these things and why that's important. You can definitely make sure to take care of your own mental health so that you are emotionally regulated and can better support your child from a calmer mental state as opposed to like being quicker to anger. You can help your child learn about their different emotions through things like emotion wheels for kids, and help them identify their emotions and help them also regularly practice emotional regulation techniques when they're calm, like deep breathing and stretching, so that they can learn to use them when their emotions intensify. So just having that regular routine of that. You can also create regular time to check in with your child and build that relationship with them so they feel comfortable coming to you, kind of like what we've already been talking about if they're struggling. Um, we kind of already talked about this, but just again, digging deeper beyond the surface level questions of just how are you, how was school, because they can just answer them with those one word answers, right? So you can ask about things like their hobbies, their interests, who their friends are, what they're enjoying both in and out of school, what is challenging for them. And again, just really encourage you to try to listen the best that we can without judgment, with open ears, and without trying to necessarily control or change what they're doing by offering your recommendations, which I know is hard as parents. And it again depends on the age of the child, but if they're not asking for your opinion, if they just want to share, like allowing them to do so and really encouraging them to explore and pursue their interests, and then you can offer support, of course, if they're experiencing any challenges, and always ask for help if you're not sure how to help your child. And then again, if you have concerns about if your child, you feel like their mental health is not doing so well, you can always again ask them to go to their school counselor or social worker and have a conversation, or look into getting them private therapy. You can also consult with your child and your mental health provider throughout the process if they already have one, or even their like physician as well. Yeah, what do you think, Rahul?
I would say really create opportunities for your child to talk without you immediately trying to solve the problem. And I think this becomes more important as your child gets older. I mean, obviously, you should have routines around sleep and meals, school and activities, encouraging healthy relationships, going outside. Creating opportunities for them to have many connections, especially if they're not having the best time at school, having friends outside of school, in the community, at church, at soccer, at any of those sporting events is really good. As parents, I know we get really busy. I know I'm really busy, three kids, working a full-time job, but paying attention to changes in behavior and letting your child know that asking for help is a sign of strength, right? And so when they're asking for support, like not jumping into problem solving mode or not jumping into critiquing like you're tired probably because you didn't go to sleep, like not doing that, but really trying to think about is there an underlying issue here that you should be trying to support in a more proactive way. The other thing that I will say, just from a personal experience, that was huge for me is get a community of people around you whose children are older than yours. So in my friend group, I got married young and my kids are older than all my friends' kids. And so my kids were the first to sort of experience a lot of things. And I cannot tell you how much more beneficial it was for me when I began to surround myself around a community of people whose kids were older than mine, just for perspective, for being able to see what lies ahead. You know, hearing from their experiences, the concerns that they're having gave me an opportunity to think about them ahead of time before they became my issues, and my things that I had to deal with so that I could educate myself. I would say dig deep and understand what is age appropriate behavior and what are things that may be of concern. So, one book I would highly recommend for school age children is this book that I have here. It's called Yardsticks. And what it does is it gives you an opportunity. It's for ages 4 to 14. And it has, if you go through each of the chapters, you find your child's age and it tells you a range of things that are age appropriate for your kid and what you can expect a child who is 4 years old to be able to do. This is really helpful. All my staff reads this as well. And if you're teaching, like, say, for example, first grade, most first graders are about 6 years old. We have them also look at what is a typical 5-year old doing, what is a typical 7-year old doing, because just because your kid is like age-wise 6, they might be behaving developmentally maybe a little bit younger at 5 or a little bit more advanced at 7. So having an idea of that range of what would be the average expected behaviors for your kid gives you an understanding of like, wait a minute, whining is actually age appropriate at 2, right? It's not age appropriate at 6. And so it's not always just about the behavior, but is it appropriate for your kid at that age? And the same thing with if you're doing something that is very advanced for a child's age, and I see this a lot with our adolescent girls. When you are hyper fixated on your appearance or your, what your makeup and all of that, very age appropriate for high schoolers. Okay? Might not be age appropriate for a kid who is 10 or 9. So where is that coming from? And you want to be able to know what's age appropriate first before we deem that it's a cause of concern. And also being able to guide your child through things that they might need help in developing if they are not where they need to be with their same age peers. Because as they get older, obviously, we all mature at different rates and eventually we all become adults. But when you are younger and in your adolescent years, that lack of maturity or that not being able to keep up with what is age appropriate for your peers becomes really a problem beginning at that middle school. And I would say specifically around 7th grade is when kids really start to notice like who is doing what everyone should be doing and who is not. And that can become a source of a mental health concern. So if you educate yourself as a parent and you know what those are, you can help support your child with those age appropriate behaviors. And I don't know if you want to add anything more, Ruth. But
No, I think that was great though.
okay.
Really important. Thank you for sharing that book. It sounds like a really great resource for learning what those appropriate milestones are. And I think just for the sake of time, maybe we skip over to our last two questions.
Okay. So our last two questions are, how can I help my child prepare for going back to school?
So you can express your excitement for another year, right, of learning and growth to really, try to frame it positively for your child if they're feeling a little nervous, or not ready to go back. Some might be ready to go back, just depends. But you can definitely check in with your child and ask them, like, how are you feeling about the upcoming school year? And what are you excited about? What are you nervous about? And just talk together and create a plan with your child of how to support them with any concerns that they might have, and also ways to build on their strengths. You both can create goals for the upcoming school year and discuss strategies for success. What would you add, Rahul?
I would really begin starting the conversation before school, reestablish routines. If they're going to be having a year where there's a transition, so like kindergarten is a big one, 3rd grade, you become one of the bigger elementary school age students, and grades start to matter a little bit more. Middle school is a big one, high school is a big one, college is a big one. So when you're thinking about those bigger age milestones, I think thinking about what might be potential concerns and kind of front loading that so they know that this is a normal, routine that might happen or a normal concern that might happen at this grade level. I think talking about what your child is looking forward to, what they're nervous about, and how you can support those nerves. And if they're normal nerves, that's okay. If there have been significant changes over the summer, talking about that, if there's been a big move, if there's, kids who have like um, body concerns that might have changed over the summer, just kind of keeping that into perspective. And if it's something you feel like your school should know, I definitely would let them know about that. And then Ruth, what would you recommend? I know you said talking about topics. What are recommended topics that you think could be sensitive when discussing with students and kids?
Yeah. So it's normal to be concerned about your child's development, including their bodies and if they're eating enough. And I know I'm bringing up the topic because I know this comes up a lot, I think, in our communities where we feel very comfortable talking about people's bodies and how they're adjusting or changes. But they are topics that we really do need to be very sensitive about if we bring them up, and just be mindful of commenting on how much or how little they're eating, and mindful of regularly talking about their bodies and if they've gained or lost weight. We should also try to avoid forcing kids to finish their food when they say they're full, or forcing them to eat foods they do not want to eat. I've met with clients as college students, as adults who really share like struggles with eating because of being forced to like finish the meal, or having difficulty knowing like when they're actually full. So it can have potentially unforeseen consequences. That doesn't mean that you can't get creative as parents with getting your kids to eat more and trying to eat them healthy foods, right? That's not what I'm saying, but just kind of being mindful about the way we're discussing things, just to not put pressure on our children to potentially develop disordered eating patterns like eating less, skipping meals, exercising excessively, or throwing up to lose weight. And then just being mindful of the pressure you may be intentionally be putting on your child to perform academically and be a certain kind of perfect child. Again, nothing wrong with encouraging your child to be the best they can be, but also making space for the conversations and letting them know that it's okay to not be perfect. They don't have to get straight A's, even though it'd be great if they did, right? And just making them room for them to be themselves. What would you add, Rahul?
Thank you, Ruth. I think those are all great suggestions. I mean, really quickly, I would just add focus on how you're discussing any topic that you choose to discuss. So sometimes even well-intentioned conversations can really increase pressure. For example, repeatedly focusing on grades, comparing your child to a sibling or a cousin. How many of us have had that happen throughout our childhoods? Dismissing their concerns, telling them it's nothing to worry about, or like I said, immediately jumping into problem solving. I would really, really encourage you to listen and just listen. And I think this is so, so important as your child gets older, especially when they get into those middle school and high school years. A parent, an older parent in my circle told me one of the things that she would also always ask her kid when they started talking, she would say, "Oh, tell me more." And you will not believe the tell you more, how much more they will tell you if you don't interrupt them. And obviously, as a parent, I'm taking that all in and I might do something with that information later, but in the moment, I just want to hear what they're going to tell me and then I can freak out later, talk to my husband or my partner and figure out what we're going to do about the craziness that my parents or my students and my kids just got through telling me. So, here are a couple of examples, like just really practical. Instead of asking your kid if they got a poor grade, like, why'd you get that grade? Maybe asking, how are you feeling about the grade that you got? How are you feeling about school? What's going on? And kind of leaving it more open. If your kid is telling you something about them being nervous, instead of you saying, oh, you have nothing to be nervous about, maybe just saying, oh, it sounds like you are really nervous. Tell me what you're worried about. So you really want to provide an opportunity and a platform for your child to open up to you because when you know you can do something about that. But that really starts with how you respond when they tell you something. If you freak out, if you immediately go into, yelling Habesha parent mode, they're going to clam up. The older that they get, they're not going to share those important details with you. And so it really becomes a fine line between I want to be open, I want to listen, I don't want to freak out, but then like what are you going to do if they do end up telling you some things that, as a parent you have to do something about if there's a consequence or if there's something that you need to do something about. So finding that balance I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we're ready to wrap up. We've reached the end of our time. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you to the Habesha community who has tuned in to today's discussion. This platform and this space is being made possible by Habesha Health. So it is an amazing platform for people to be able to communicate and to be able to have an opportunity to discuss issues particular to us with our cultural lens. So if you feel led to do so, please, we would love for you to donate to habeshahealth.org. Your donations support all the administrative expenses that come along with creating this platform. And we would love to share our contact information with you if you have any follow-up questions for Ruth and I. And I think we'd also like to dig into the chat and see if we can go ahead and answer some of those questions that might have been put in there.
See. Looks like one of the questions from Naomi was, what are the most effective ways to address a child's mental health concerns when they begin to affect their academic performance and peer relationships? Um, Yeah, so I think I'm not sure if this was asked before we maybe started to address those questions, but really starting to again check in with your child about the concerns that you're having, and then maybe touching base with some of those other folks, like the parents, the teachers, just to see what they're noticing on their end, and then kind of taking next steps to address what those concerns might be, whether that's having them see the school social worker, counselor, or getting them to therapy could be some ways to address that. But starting with that conversation. Um,
I will just also add that I find that a lot of times when there are concerns, whether they're academic, as educator, or if they are mental health concerns, parents want to shield their child from them like not talking about it. And I think it's important that your kid knows themselves, right? So if anxiety, for example, becomes a mental health concern, I think it's okay to say, hey, I think you're feeling a little anxious. Here are some things we can do to help you be less anxious, like naming it, telling them that that's something that you are noticing, if it's something that you're noticing, and then becoming a thing that they work on so that they know, I'm feeling a little anxious. Like that's what this is. This is anxiety. So how can I support that? Or if it's body dysmorphia or whatever it is, like naming it so that you have a starting point for how you can support your child and how they can support themselves. Because as they get older, and I think you mentioned that even as a 30-year-old, that you are struggling with how you see yourself and comparing yourself, right? Mental health is something that doesn't just go away because you get older. A lot of the struggles that children face when they become kids, I mean, luckily with therapy and treatment and all of that, we hope that it becomes less of an issue and that, you are able to manage it. But sometimes there are things that we take into adulthood with us. And so being able to be educated about what's happening in your own body and your own mind, I think is a really powerful tool that we can give to students and to kids. The next one, I think the other question says, how can parents access language interpreting services when speaking with the school or individuals in the mental health field?
um,
I'll just jump in and say,
please.
I support my mom through all of her health needs and concerns. But if she is not there, actually, if I'm not there, most hospitals have a dial-in service where they get an interpreter. And, we've been in the country for a while now. Obviously, that was not a thing when we first came here. And if it was, Tigrinya was never, that's the language that we speak, was not offered. I know some of the bigger languages were, but Tigrinya was not one of them. And so now it is really refreshing to see that if you can ask for an interpreter, but oftentimes when they see that I'm not with her or she needs support, they will say, would you like an interpreter? She'll say yes, and they will get on the phone, dial, and it'll be provided through her health service. So that might be a good question to ask if you're with like Blue Cross and Blue Shield or whatever your health service is, like if they have that, if that particular hospital has that. The same thing at schools. When we are holding a meeting and we know that a parent needs more support with English language, we are required to, if we have, like we have a lot of Spanish speakers in our community, or if we have Arabic speakers and Chinese speakers, we usually can pull them from either teachers or personnel that already work. But if it is a language that is a little bit more not as accessible, we are required to hire a service that we use, that we dial in again, and we have an interpreter on the phone for every single meeting that we host. Um, at my elementary school, they used to do this as well, just informally. They would have all of the Tigrinya speaking Eritrean kids have their conferences on the same day, and they would bring an interpreter, and she would just run through it. So if you come from a smaller school district, this might not be something that is like an in-person thing, but I definitely think it's worth asking about, and it's worth seeking out. I know a lot of health professionals already have it as a part of something that you pay for with your health insurance.
The last question looks like I have so many of my aunties that fear or hesitate seeking mental health or educational support for their child because they think it will go on their record and affect future opportunities such as college admissions. What would you say to parents who have these concerns? It's a great question, and I don't think you have to disclose anything on unless you want to. Normally, there's like that optional question when you're completing applications from my experience of like, do you have a disability? And it can be helpful to disclose if you want access to those services, but you can still seek out access to those services even if you don't disclose. But I don't know if you have, what would you say, Rahul, if you have anything to add?
I think, okay, so your child's academic records do go with them, not to college, and from one school district to the next school district, parents usually have to sign a release of information form. So if you are moving, you sign a form and whatever your paperwork was there, your paperwork will go to you from one school district to the next school district. A lot of the times we see this if you're going from, eighth grade to high school or high school to college. But if you move within those elementary school years, the same thing. But schools can request too. So when I get a kid who has no information and we're seeing some concerns, I'll call. I'll be like, "What school did they go to?" I'll ask the student, and and you can find information, and you can go and a school can request records from another school, and there are some things that go with the kid because you've requested those records. They're not going to be everything. So parents do have the opportunity to withhold some pieces of information. If you are wanting to seek mental health services, but you don't want your child to be stigmatized, you don't have to do anything at school. You can seek all outside therapy. You can do everything outside of the school day. You do not have to share anything with your child's teachers. You really don't. You could. You should, I think, if you feel like those things, what, let me back that up. I don't think you should if you feel like it is not affecting your child during the school day. If you think they're having mental health concerns that the school could help support your child overcome by them knowing, then inform them. If you feel like there is something that you can handle at home or it's something that is not really affecting their academic performance, then you can seek out all your own private health care and never inform the school anything. And that way you keep it private. Teachers and, like school personnel are supposed to keep things private. They are, and they do for the most part. But I will say that sometimes teachers have to share information. So in K-8, for example, if you're in elementary school and you're in my homeroom and you're going to go to music class or you're going to go to PE and you might have something that really triggers you or really bothers you, I might share that information as your homeroom teacher with the PE teacher. And that is an appropriate sharing of information, right? Because those are teachers too who are taking care of your child and are there to support them. If you're a parent who likes to keep things very private, I think you can still help support your child and not disclose all of their information to those parents, or I'm sorry, to those other professionals.
Yeah, and the potential benefits, right, of like your child getting the appropriate supports because those school staff know and can better support your child is something to also keep in mind too. But it's a great question.
Yeah. I think those are all of our questions. So thank you so much.
Mm.
Again, we are so grateful to our Habesha community who have come for this discussion, and we hope it has been helpful. Our contact information is available. Go ahead and reach out to any of us if you would like to have additional or more private conversations about your child's needs.